first I should thank Dr. Panja and his team for giving me a chance to brush my basic neurology knowledge. So this is we are trying to make this into a series of talks on movement disorders, and this will be the first discussion, and it is primarily called the anatomical basis of movement disorders. So to people, I am Kaushik, and I am a consultant stroke and interventional neurologist at Artix Calcutta, and I've been told that most of the students or most of the people who will be attending this are MD students and who will be going for exams and so on and so forth. So before I go in further, the disclosure is that uh, I am not a movement disorder specialist. I am not a guy who knows everything about movement disorders. But the thing is, what I can tell you is the shortcuts to understand movement disorders, because I'm a fairly young guy and I've recently given my exam. So, so I had my own way of understanding movement disorders. And I hope that I'm able to pass this shortcut to you so that you understand it and then you read the subject in depth later on. The idea is that the basics should never go wrong. If you get the basics right, then no matter how much you add on to it, it's going to be easy. But if you get your basics wrong, then everything goes down from there. So the first statement is, whenever we say movement disorder, if any structure that we think that is related to movement disorder, we talk about basal ganglia. This is what is going to be talked about in any forum, in any class, in any structure, in any bedside clinic. If anybody is going to talk about movement disorder, they are going to talk about basal ganglia. So basal ganglia is equal to movement disorder, which is equal to extrapyramidal system. So this is what we should first have in mind. I'm sure you know that. So when we say basal ganglia, that is equivalent to movement disorder. But what is this basal ganglia? There is something called a radiological basal ganglia or a radiologist basal ganglia. We are not talking about that. For example, if you have a stroke in a basal ganglia, you will say it's a basal ganglia bleed, or you may say there is an infarct in the basal ganglia. That is not what we are talking about, because that helps the radiologist to localize the territory. For example, you have the caudate here, the putamen and the globus pallidus here, you have the internal capsule that is coming through here, and then you have the thalamus, and we call this the basal ganglia. We call it a basal ganglia infarct, basal ganglia tumor, basal ganglia signal changes, but this is not a clinician's basal ganglia. So when I say, or when any clinician says that we are talking about basal ganglia, we are not talking about the radiological basal ganglia. If not, then what is the basal ganglia? This is the basal ganglia. This is what we should keep in our mind whenever we are talking about movement disorders. So if we look at it, it is very simple. So when I say corpus striatum, it means the caudate and the putamen. So the caudate and the putamen together are called corpus striatum. Now this is different from what we see here. We see that the caudate is separate and the putamen is separate, but it's actually not like that. Imagine a caudate and a putamen as connected structures and the internal capsule moving over it like a carpet. So the caudate and the putamen are connected structures, and together they are called the corpus striatum. Then you have the globus pallidus, which is divided into an external segment and an internal segment. And then you have a substantia nigra, which has pars compacta and pars reticulata. And finally, a subthalamic nucleus and the thalamus. So when I am talking about basal ganglia, you should start with something called a corpus striatum. A corpus striatum would mean caudate and putamen. And then you have the globus pallidus, which has an interna and an externa. And then you have a substantia nigra, which is called pars reticulata, pars compacta. And then the subthalamic nucleus and the thalamus. Now, this is very, very important whenever we are talking about movement disorders. It can be useful for your theory, it can be useful for your clinics, and more importantly, it can be useful when we are thinking about what drugs to give patients and why particular drugs work in such conditions. This is a more extended version of the basal ganglia, where they talk about the median parafascicular complex of thalamus, then the pedunculopontine nucleus. I feel this is a little too much. I'm not going into that. So we will go with our basic basal ganglia structure, that is corpus striatum, globus pallidus, subthalamic nucleus, substantia nigra, pars compacta, and pars reticulata, and finally you will also talk about thalamus. So this is a coronal section of the brain, and this has most of our basal ganglia structures. For example, you have the caudate here, you have the putamen here, and you have the globus pallidus on the internal side. Remember, these two structures are linked, and they together they are called the corpus striatum. And then you have the globus pallidus. You can see it divided into two parts. One is the pars externa and one is the pars interna. That is a part that is outside, pars that is inside. And then you have got the substantia nigra, which is very close to the midbrain, the subthalamic nucleus, and the thalamus. Subthalamic means just under the thalamus. So subthalamic nucleus, substantia nigra, and the thalamus. Okay. So why do we need a basal ganglia? Why do we need a basal ganglia? When we say extrapyramidal, what does it do? See, the first thing we have to understand is any movement that we have in our body can never be or very difficult to be replicated by a robot, simply because it requires a lot of fine tuning. And this fine tuning happens at two levels, one at the cerebellar level and the other is at the basal ganglia level. Your brain gives an signal to say that I need a pen, I need a phone, I just need to take it. But just that command alone will not be able to help me get this phone. I need to fine tune this movement. How fast should I go? How closer is it to that place? Am I overshooting the target? Are my fingers gripping it enough to pick it up? All these kind of fine movements. In other words, to decide how fast, how slow, how much should the power be. All this requires the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. So the two important capabilities of brain are in controlling movement is to determine how rapidly the movement should be performed. That is the timing of the movement. And second is the scaling of the movement. How large or small should the movement be? For both these, basal ganglia is very important. So in simple words, basal ganglia fine tunes all our movements. If it has a problem, it results in hypo or hyperkinetic movement disorder. See, understand this very clearly. Any patient with a movement disorder problem, he doesn't have an inability to initiate a movement. See, you have a stroke and you have a Parkinson's. In stroke, he will never be able to lift the hand. In Parkinson's, it is the lifting that becomes very slow. I hope you are able to understand the difference. There is a difference in initiating a movement and there is a difference in probably fine tuning that movement. So anything to do with movement disorder does not have a problem with initiation, but more has a problem with how to go about it, the fine tuning. But remember, we are talking about basal ganglia only in relation to movements. But basal ganglia has other cut circuits also. For example, it has a circuits on cognitive skills. It has a circuits for vision. It has a circuit for hearing. So it coordinates a lot of things. Think about it like a multi amplifier, you know. It amplifies signals or it dampens signal and then proceeds to put it to the sensory cortex or allows the signal to pass through it to reach the motor system. So it basically modulates the whole thing. But for our discussion, today's discussion, we are just looking at basal ganglia in relation to movement disorders. So how does this basal ganglia fine tune movement action? So this is the center and you have a right cortical area. From the motor cortex, the fibers come down at the level of the medulla, they decussate and then they come down, then become element, and you know the whole thing. So this is the motor pathway. Now, what is unknown to you is that when the cortex is sending the signal through the brainstem all the way to the hands or the legs, it also sends a parallel signal that goes along the basal ganglia. It's like a loop which asks the basal ganglia to say whether am I doing the right thing or not. Imagine this like a king who wants to send somebody for a war. He also asks his minister whether I'm doing the right thing or not. Am I sending enough people there? Am I sending the right signals there? All that the basal ganglia does. So the cortex, as it is sending a signal into the hand or to the leg, it also asks the basal ganglia whether he is doing it right. So you have to understand that every motor signal that arises from the motor cortex actually goes through a loop through the basal ganglia to fine tune this movement and then only reaches the hand. Okay. So basically the basal ganglia controls the motor movements by two major pathways. One is the direct pathway and the other is the indirect pathway. Now, uh, the slides that I'm going to show, I'm going to be a little slow, but I would like you to imbibe this a little because this is going to be with you forever. And when you remember this easy, then any kind of movement disorder question, both clinical and otherwise, you'll be able to answer. So as I told you that when the motor cortex is stimulated, it sends a signal across to the brainstem all the way down to the motor hand or leg. But there is a loop that starts coming in the basal ganglia to fine tune this movement. And this loop has two pathways. One is called the direct pathway and indirect pathway. So before we go into these pathways, you need to know some cardinal rules. The first rule is whenever we are talking about a basal ganglia pathway, all excitatory pathways are glutamate and all inhibitory pathways are GABA. You remember for any neuropathic pain we give GABA because the moment we give GABAergic, it acts on those receptors and prevents pain. So anything that is excitatory is glutamate and anything that is inhibitory it's GABA. So whenever I have put an arrow that is green in color, it is glutamate. Whenever I have put an arrow that is red in color, that is GABA. Remember GABA, inhibitory, pain pathway. You give GABA 10, you give pregabalin, all that is all GABA only. So glutamate is excitatory, GABA is inhibitory. This is the first important cardinal step that you should remember. Then this is the second step. So cortex, I told you when we are sending the cortex, when we are talking about basal ganglia, it's striatum, globus pallidus, then you have got the substantia nigra, then you got the subthalamic nucleus, then you got the thalamus. Now, whenever the cortex is sending a signal across, I told you that the motor cortex starts a signal which sends down through the pyramidal pathways and reaches the hand or the leg. So it is an excitatory pathway. So when I say it is excitatory, it has to be glutaminergic. And so when it is sending one pathway along the pyramidal fibers, it also activates the ministers or activates the striatum. And so the first thing that you should remember is the cortex always stimulates the striatum or the caudate and the putamen by glutaminergic pathways. So the moment the cortex is ready to, okay, I have thought that I should take this phone up. The moment I get the signal is already going into my basal ganglia. The cortex is stimulating the striatum and asking whether I'm going in the right direction to pick up the phone. Now, this is most important. So as I told you here, the cortex always sends glutaminergic pathway to the striatum to stimulate it. Same way, the feedback mechanism from the thalamus to the cortex is also glutaminergic. That is, the thalamus also stimulates the cortex back. Basically, what does it do? The thalamus says to the cortex, go more, push more, all those kind of things. So, thalamus is excitatory. It stimulates the cortex and it is glutaminergic pathway. So 3 points. First point I told you is GABA is always inhibitory, glutamate is always excitatory. Second point, the moment the cortex is stimulated, it acts on the striatum. The striatum is nothing but caudate and putamen, and it is an excitatory pathway, which is glutamate. The third point I told you is the thalamus always acts back on the cortex through the glutaminergic pathway, that is excitatory pathway. So these three circles, that is the cortex to striatum and thalamus to cortex, are all glutaminergic. Point. Okay. This is the next point. When the striatum is stimulated, the striatum always sends inhibitory pathways. So we saw here there was a green arrow, So the striatum always sends inhibitory pathways, and that is GABAergic. So the thalamus stimulates the cortex stimulates the striatum, but the striatum inhibits structures under it. And what is that? That is GABAergic pathway. Now, this is very important. So I told you about what is striatum, what is thalamus, and what is cortex. So cortex stimulates the striatum, thalamus stimulates the cortex. Anything that comes out from the striatum is always inhibitory, and anything that comes from globus pallidus interna or externa is also inhibitory, which is GABAergic. Please stay with me. So I'm just talking to you again. Cortex is always stimulatory to glutaminergic pathway. and thalamus sends back signal to the cortex, which is also glutaminergic. Striatum always puts out GABAergic, and globus pallidus is also always GABAergic. So this is what the entire system looks like. Now let us understand this, what happens. This globus pallidus interna and globus pallidus externa, these are two structures that I talked about in globus pallidus. The globus pallidus interna directly acts on the thalamus, and the globus pallidus externa acts through the subthalamus. Now, I told you before, globus pallidus interna or externa, both are GABAergic, which means both inhibit. So, globus pallidus interna inhibits the thalamus. If it inhibits the thalamus, then thalamus is not able to activate the cortex. Globus pallidus externa inhibits subthalamic nucleus. And what does subthalamic nucleus do? Subthalamic nucleus is actually a stimulator for globus pallidus interna. I know it's a little difficult, but if you're just able to follow this very clearly, it is going to be very easy. So cortex is always stimulatory to striatum. Thalamus is always stimulatory back to the cortex. Globus pallidus externa and interna always send inhibitory cells. Striatum always has inhibition. And then the subthalamic nucleus, when it receives from globus pallidus externa, it is inhibitory, and when it is going towards interna, it is excitatory. I will explain to you once we go about the direct pathway. Now see what is direct pathway. So I told you that there is something called a direct pathway and an indirect pathway. So let us imagine that my mind is getting ready to pick up this phone. The moment that happens, the cortex starts the basal ganglia loop. And let us say we are just going and observing the direct pathway. So the cortex stimulates the striatum. And what does striatum do? Striatum is always inhibitory. If you remember this slide, striatum is always inhibitory. So what does it do? The moment the cortex stimulates the striatum, it inhibits, it sends inhibitory signals to globus pallidus interna. Now, what does normally globus pallidus interna do? Normally, globus pallidus interna is supposed to inhibit the thalamus. So, when the striatum acts on the globus pallidus interna, the inhibitory signal that is supposed to send to the thalamus is lost. So, it does not inhibit the thalamus anymore. So, thalamus is now like a class without a teacher. So, what does thalamus do? It immediately activates the cortex. So, in direct pathway, it actually enhances the motion. Basically, if you have a direct pathway, that means the movements are accelerated. I'll come back to this, meaning I'll say this again. So you have the cortex excites the striatum, and then the striatum in turn is, when it's activated, it inhibits the globus pallidus interna. And because globus pallidus interna is inhibited, you have the thalamus that is no longer under the control of globus pallidus. So thalamus acts on the cortex and enhances all movements. So in simple words, direct pathway promotes motor cortex activation and hence in turn promotes movement. Now let us understand what is the indirect pathway. So to call it indirect means, if you see in direct pathway, there is no subthalamic nucleus involved. In indirect pathway, it is the subthalamic nucleus that comes into play. Now what happens? The cortex is stimulated. The moment it is stimulated, it activates the striatum. The only difference between direct and indirect pathway in striatum is the striatum inhibits globus pallidus externa. Now, when it inhibits globus pallidus externa, what does the globus pallidus externa normally do? Normally, the globus pallidus externa is supposed to send inhibitory signals to the subthalamic nucleus. Now, because the striatum has inhibited the globus pallidus externa, the subthalamic nucleus is no longer under the control of globus pallidus, which means the subthalamic nucleus now acts as if it's a classroom without a teacher. So subthalamic nucleus says, I am going to stimulate the globus pallidus interna. And the moment globus pallidus interna is stimulated, the globus pallidus interna hits the thalamus. It says, thalamus, don't act too much. And this thalamus in turn is not able to stimulate the cortex, hence the movements come down. I'll repeat this again. So cortex stimulates the striatum. the striatum always sends GABAergic fibers, and GABAergic fibers are in the globus pallidus externa, and globus pallidus externa normally subdues or hits the subthalamic nuclei. But because the striatum has activated globus pallidus externa, meaning it has inhibited here, this is inhibited and the subthalamic nucleus now acts without control. So it activates the globus pallidus interna, which in turn inhibits thalamus, and hence the cortex is no longer active. So in other words, in indirect pathway, the movements are reduced. So the basic difference between the two is depends upon which area of the globus pallidus is being acted by the striatum. The striatum acts directly on globus pallidus interna, then the thalamus is no longer under the globus pallidus control and it activates the cortex. Whereas in an indirect pathway, the striatum acts on the globus pallidus externa, which in turn inhibits, meaning the subthalamic nucleus control is lost, and so subthalamic nucleus acts more on the globus pallidus interna and thereby depressing the role of thalamus, and hence cortex is no longer active. So direct pathway stimulates movement and indirect pathway reduces movement. So then where is the famous substantia nigra? Now substantia nigra is very close to the striatum. This connection between substantia nigra and the striatum is called the nigrostriatal pathway. So as I told you, you know what is striatum and what is substantia nigra. So striatum is nothing but your caudate and putamen nucleus. The dopamine is produced by substantia nigra that acts on the striatum, and dopamine acts on D1 and D2 receptors. So substantia nigra is very close to your striatum, and that pathway is called nigrostriatal pathway. And this substantia nigra, as I told you, acts on the striatum. So the substantia nigra through D1 receptors and D2 receptors in the striatum, it stimulates. What does it stimulate? D1 stimulates direct pathway and D2 inhibits indirect pathway. So we remember direct pathway is through globus pallidus interna and it stimulates movement. Indirect pathway is through globus pallidus externa and it inhibits movement. So when you have a dopaminergic pathway, it stimulates direct pathway and inhibits indirect pathway, and hence dopaminergic pathway stimulates movement. That is why when you have a dopaminergic deficiency, as in Parkinson's disease, the movement is actually reduced. Now I told you the dopaminergic pathway, that is substantia nigra, activates direct pathway and inhibits indirect pathway, and hence it's a very good pathway to accelerate movement. But is there anything that inhibits movement? And that is the cholinergic pathway. What is the cholinergic pathway? This is located in the striatum whose axons do not leave striatum. So I told you striatum is caudate and putamen. Now please understand this. There are structures that are inhibiting extra movements. That is the cholinergic pathway, and it is present in the caudate and putamen nucleus. Now what does this striatum and cholinergic pathway do? Cholinergic pathway inhibits direct pathway and stimulates indirect pathway. That means what? It basically causes reduced movements. Now why is this important? If we understand what structures are involved in various diseases, it becomes very easy for us to understand how this disease is going to manifest. So dopaminergic pathway facilitates movement by direct pathway and inhibiting indirect pathway, and cholinergic system inhibits movement by activating indirect pathway and inhibiting direct pathway. So basically dopaminergic causes movements, cholinergic inhibits movements. Dopaminergic activates direct pathway and inhibits the indirect pathway. Cholinergic activates indirect pathway and inhibits direct pathway. Now let us understand three structures: Parkinson's disease, hemibalismus, and Huntington's chorea. These are the three things that we are going to talk about. So when we talk about Parkinson's disease, we talked about substantia nigra being lost. So when there is no substantia nigra, that means there is no dopaminergic pathway. If there is no dopaminergic pathway, then what happens? Your direct pathway is no longer active and your indirect pathway is more active. So what happens? So your direct pathway, because it is no longer active and indirect pathway takes over, you will have paucity of movements. Now look at Huntington's chorea. Huntington's chorea is a disease of the caudate nucleus. When we say caudate, what happens? Caudate means the cholinergic system or the axons in the striatum are affected. So when the cholinergic systems are affected, then the cholinergic system is not able to inhibit the direct pathway and it stimulates indirect pathway. So what happens? It actually causes more movements to happen, and because there are more movements, the cholinergic pathway is being deficient. It results in chorea. Same way to the subthalamic nucleus. If you look at this picture of the subthalamic nucleus, yeah. So the subthalamic nucleus is instrumental in actually stimulating the globus pallidus interna, which in turn inhibits thalamus. Now, if the subthalamic nucleus is lost, then there is no way to stimulate the globus pallidus interna, and the thalamus keeps on acting on the cortex, thereby causing more movements. So, any structure that involves the striatum, that is a striatum like caudate, putamen, or the subthalamic nucleus, will cause hyperkinetic movement disorders. And anything that involves a substantia nigra will cause dopaminergic deficiency, thereby causing hypokinetic movement disorder. So with this, I will stop for now, and I would be happy if somebody asks some questions on this, because it's a very difficult concept to understand. But if you understand this, you can write pathophysiology of Parkinson's, pathophysiology of something like Huntington's chorea, pathophysiology of hemipallismus and subthalamic nuclear involvement and all that. So I throw this open for discussion now. If anybody has any doubts, I'll be happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, no questions as of now, actually.
Were you all able to understand this? This is slightly a little in depth, but if you understand this, it becomes very easy to understand movement disorder from here forward.
Oh, Dr. Srinath wrote that I am there, sir.
Srinath, were you able to understand? I know you now. I thought I will just break the ice. If you want, you can speak also.
Yeah, you can press the speak button.
Okay. So I have a question from Miss Dr. Krishna Dalvi. So why does hemipallismus occur only in half part of the body? So I'm just sharing my screen again. Let's just look at this picture. So when we see this, this is the cortex, this is the basal ganglia structure, and this is the brainstem, correct? So when the pyramidal fibers are crossing over and coming to the other side. So hemipallismus is what? It is basically a hyperkinetic movement disorder. So when a subthalamic nucleus is involved on this side, then what happens? Then the cortical circuit that is coming from that end to this side is the only circuit that is affected. So like your pyramidal fibers, the extrapyramidal fibers are also side dependent. It basically fine tunes the pathway that comes from the cortex and crosses over to the other side. So supposing if you have a left subthalamic nuclear problem, then you will have a right hemipallismus, because it fine tunes the movement of the pyramidal tract that comes from the left side to the right hand. There are conditions where bilateral subthalamic nucleus can be involved. Then in that case you can have hemipallismus on both the sides. But usually if one single structure is involved, then you will have hemipallismus. Did I make my point clear, Dr. Krishna? Is there any other questions? Oh yeah, thanks. Thank you.
No, I think, sir, there is no other question yet.
The thing is, if you are able to understand what is a direct and an indirect pathway, it helps you to understand what medicines you need to give. For example, you know there is a cholinergic pathway that is deficient in subthalamic nucleus or caudate nucleus involvement that causes hyperkinetic movement disorder. So you just have to replace the cholinergic drugs. And when we are talking about the dopaminergic pathway, it is substantia nigra pathway, and it goes through direct and indirect pathways. And so if you just have to give dopaminergic system for Parkinsonism, so that it helps. So, and it helps in theory also, you know, when you have to write about a 10-mark question on, say, Parkinson's or Huntington's chorea and all that. So the pathophysiology, you can just write about what is direct and indirect pathway, and then say that, you know, when your subthalamic nucleus is involved, then your indirect pathway gets eliminated. And I told you this, right? When indirect pathway means subthalamic nucleus. So if subthalamic nucleus is not there, indirect pathway is not there. So if indirect pathway is not there, it's only direct pathway. And in direct pathway is the only thing that is there, then you will have hyper movements. Everything will be hyper. So if you are able to write this, you can write this in exam. You can talk about this elsewhere. That makes your theory and your theoretical aspect of this disease very strong. I will try and send this slides across to maybe to Srinath, and he can probably share it with all of you. I don't have any problem sharing the slides. Okay, if it's all done, tomorrow I was thinking of talking to you about Parkinson's. I think I was a little fast today. So maybe tomorrow I'll be talking about Parkinsonism and slow movement disorders. So we will just discuss about what is Parkinson's and what is Parkinsonism, how it is different between each, and what we can do about it and all that. Fine.
Yes.
Okay. Can we close the session then?
Yeah. Okay, sir. I'm closing the session then. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thanks a lot, all of you. Bye bye.
Bye.